All right, we've got another big topic today, one that's also hotly debated, and that is animal products. And I want you to notice that in the title, I used the term animal fats instead of animal protein. Animal protein is the phrase that we're so used to hearing when it comes to any foods that are derived from animals. And the reason why I made that what I believe is an important distinction is because we've associated with a need for protein as the main driver for eating animal products, and that just simply isn't the case. And although there's going to be a totally separate topic on protein coming up, where we'll get more in depth on that, I just wanted to point that out to start to train our minds from thinking animal foods, protein, and start to think about animal foods and fat, because that really is the reality. Now, I'll get more into that as we go, so let's jump right in. So when I talk about meat, I'm going to be talking about meat from all animals, and I'm also going to be lumping in eggs and fish into that category. And dairy, I'm going to talk about now separately, and that will obviously mean milk and ice cream and cream cheeses and cheese in general. So that'll be lumped into that category. All derived from animals, all have their own kind of unique concerns that we'll get into right now. So let's talk about dairy. Let's talk specifically about milk and cheese. A couple of really important points I'd like to get across. Through our research and through our practice with others, we have found that suggesting and people trying to eliminate or at a minimum cut down dramatically their dairy and their meat consumption has been one of the most beneficial tools to healing and achieving weight loss and the vitality that they've been looking for. And there's lots of reasons why. So let's talk about just we're just going to talk about the body, the physical nutrition, the digestion, the physiological nature of eating. We're not going to get into ethical and environmental. That would be for an entirely another segment and is kind of it's going to be outside the workshop. So let's just stick to diet and our challenge and get right into dairy. First off, we are the only species on the earth that drinks the milk of another animal, and we drink it well past our infant early childhood development stages. This is simply not natural in the rest of the animal kingdom. Now, people will say, well, yeah, I give milk to my cat and whatnot, but the preferred natural milk is to drink milk from the same species. Now, why is that? The milk of one animal is designed to raise another animal from that particular species. Not all milk is the same. And that is why we have such a high incidence of lactose intolerance in this country. Some people are violently intolerant to milk and dairy. Now, that makes a lot of sense. It's estimated that 70% or more of us are intolerant to some extent, to some degree. And I believe that. We just don't make the enzymes anymore from mother's milk. And this isn't mother's milk, but even if we were drinking mother's milk, human mother's milk, the enzymes are not there. We don't have them. We only have them for a certain amount of time in our lives, and that is in the early developmental stages. We have particular enzymes to break down the galactose and the casein in milk for our growth and development at the very critical age. Cow's milk is made for a cow. And now one of the main components of cow's milk is a protein called casein. It's actually called a casomorphin. Now I want to talk about that term for a second because the word morphine is in there. Now casein is a milk protein that breaks apart into opiate-like structures that attach to the same receptors of our brain that heroin does. And that's interesting. Did you ever hear of milk and dairy as having an opiate-like impact? Perhaps not in the way I've just described, and this is all science, by the way. But it makes sense that this opiate-like feature that is designed by nature is there for a reason. And when you take a step back, the common sense thing is, well, yeah, you want a baby calf to really want the mother's milk. Almost want that to have a natural opiate-like effect, because that is where the only place the calf is going to get its nutrients early on. So having that almost, pleasure component built in is another incentive. It's a big driver of a cow like craving and going after mother's milk. Now, the problem with that is these casomorphines. Human breast milk is very different from cow's milk. Like I mentioned, in human breast milk, it's estimated that there are maybe 2.7 grams of casein in a liter of mother's milk, as opposed to 26 or 10 times as much in cow's milk. And it makes sense because a cow is born at like 80 pounds. A cow will grow up to be 1,000 pounds if it's not, and that's not if it's not jacked up with hormones and made to grow big and fat like most of them are. It's an entirely different animal. So that is why when you hear things like, "Oh, I'll give up everything, but I'll never give up my cheese," the hardest food for people to give up, and in studies that have been done, is pizza. It's got cheese, it's got the refined sugars, and all of that is very addictive. So thinking about dairy as having an addictive quality actually makes a lot of sense when we think about our love affair with cheese. I used to eat it, I used to love it, I used to put it on everything. I get it. The fact of the matter is, those good feelings and those sensations and that enjoyment that we're getting come with a very high price. Are we getting protein from animals? Yes, but are we getting the right kind of protein that is made for our body? The answer is no. No. We are getting protein, but we're getting protein that's much harder on our organs. And in addition, we're getting a lot of other stuff that is not good. Predominantly saturated fat, cholesterol, and those two are the main drivers of most heart disease. People with cholesterol levels of 150 or lower, the incidence of heart disease is incredibly low. And cholesterol and fat, when we intake fat, our body produces bile, which has cholesterol in it, that puts cholesterol in the blood, bile in the blood. And in addition to our own body creating cholesterol, we're taking in external cholesterol, and we don't need any. This is incredibly problematic. It causes fat to be stored. It causes insulin to be produced. It causes fat in the cells to interact with insulin receptors and brain activity. So all of this fat is really a huge problem, and eliminating this fat is going to free our body up. It's got lots of calories, and it's got very little nutritional value. The only claim to fame in all animal fat is protein, and again, it's not the protein that is going to build us up quickly and be absorbed by the body quickly. So let's go a little bit further with that. In addition to the fat and the cholesterol in the animal foods and dairy, which it's acidic to the body. The body doesn't recognize this as mother's milk. It recognizes it as something else. And that, by nature of being acidic, what does the body do? It tries to take anything that's acidic and neutralize it with alkalinity. Where does it get the alkalinity? Believe it or not, it gets the alkalinity from the calcium in our bones. So what I'm saying is that what we've been taught for generations and generations, that milk, builds strong bones, it's actually the opposite. That drawing of strength and alkalinity from our bones makes our bones more brittle. And there are studies that have been done, I can put some links in showing you exactly that, of a higher incidence of hip fractures in those that consume more dairy. It's unbelievable, but this is the reality, and people don't want to believe it, and certainly the Dairy Association doesn't want this to be widely known, but these are in fact the truths that we need to be looking at, especially if we're consuming a high amount of dairy, milk, cheese, ice cream, butter. Another problem with the dairy is IGF-1. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's called insulin growth factor. Now, this IGF-1 is a cancer-promoting growth hormone that is involved in every stage of cancer, the growth of cancer cells and the metastasis, which is the spreading around the body. IGF-1 is a big driver of that in cancer cells. All animal fats and products boost the level of IGF-1 in our systems. More studies are being done about linkages between dairy and breast cancer and prostate cancer. Increasing the likelihood or the chance of getting it by 35% or more. This is incredible. Breast and prostate cancer alone are affecting millions and millions of our loved ones and perhaps ourselves. again, this is just another benefit of cutting down or cutting out these foods. They're incredibly hard for our digestive system to break down. It's such a big, dense, toxic project for our body to break down and eliminate. And some of us are eating meat and dairy at every meal, 3 times a day. This simply is just too much for the body. It backs up. Our body starts to break down. It starts to add fat. It damages our gut lining. It changes our gut bacteria. Now add in, and I'm going to shift a little bit into meat and dairy as a whole. When we look at what the animals that we're eating are fed, so we are what we eat, and we are what we eats. So let's look at that for a second. The animals, we're consuming over 60 billion cows, chickens, and whatnot a year. We consume over 1 million chickens an hour in this country. To meet that incredible demand, we have to literally mass produce animals. And that is what's done. These animals are not, for the most part, a very small percentage are. And man, you're going to pay for this kind of meat, the pasture raised, traditional imagery that you've been led to believe on the labels and the milk containers and the milk cartons and on the meats of, these lovely, happy animals on these, sunny green pastures with, the friendly farmer and his family. The reality is that 99 point whatever percent of the meats that we're eating are not raised in a setting like that. It's much different. It's much more resembles a factory. That's why they call it factory farming. Now, these animals are not fed, in addition to the many abuses that the animals suffer, what they're fed is not their natural diet. So what they are fed, we're eating as well. And we need to really be aware of that. So whatever your choice is ultimately going to be on how much animal fat you intake and whether you feel it serves you or doesn't, obviously is your choice. But knowing what's in it is what we really want to get through because it's just so important. So I don't know if you know this, but cows and most of the pigs, the chickens are fed things that they're not naturally meant to eat. Now, what is that? What are they fed? They're usually fed, for the most part, genetically modified grains. Now, we talked about these in the processed food section. These are foods that have been modified to withstand herbicides. So when the farmer sprays the crop, the weeds die, and the soy, the corn, or whatnot survives. Guess what? That's on the food. We eat it directly in a lot of the grains and stuff in the supermarket like we talked about, but our animals are eating it as well. This is not their natural diet. It makes them sick. It makes them require antibiotics. That's why a lot of the cows get antibiotics. They're eating food that's damaging their internals. But it does make them fat, and it makes them fat fast. What else makes them fat and makes them fat fast is growth hormones. And chickens, as a little aside, are pretty much all given antibiotics prophylactically. There are so many raised in such tight quarters that they cut themselves with their beaks. Some animal farm raisers cut the beaks. A lot of times they're stacked one on top of each other, so they're in such tight quarters that they get cut and they need antibiotics. So instead of treating the chickens that are cut, they just treat them all because so many of them are going to require antibiotics. So that's what we're really getting in addition to the fat and cholesterol. Cows are meant to eat grass and grass only. Chickens eat worms, insects, berries, leafy greens. That's their natural diet, not these grains. Pigs. One of the pig's favorite meals in nature is acorns, and they love mushrooms and roots and bulbs and tubers. They like to get their nose in the ground. That's why they have those noses. They're not meant to eat grass. They're not meant to eat grains. Now that is a big problem, and we're actually getting GMO'd grains in our meat, in addition to, again, fat, cholesterol. They add a lot of sodium. They add a lot of dyes to the flesh of these animals because as flesh decays, it doesn't become bright pink and it becomes gray. It becomes smelly. It becomes disgusting. Have you driven by a roadkill lately? That's what happens to decaying animal flesh. That's not a live food. That's not going to enter our system and build us up. and fire, help free radicals with antioxidants, and provide key vitamins and minerals and high water content to deliver nutrients and take out waste. We're not getting any of that. We're getting this mass muscle meat that is weighing down our system and is loaded with all of these harmful constituents. Now, wow, what about some of the label, the more higher quality meats? So if you are going to eat meat and continue to make it a big portion of your diet, then we really want it to be of the utmost quality. And here we need to just mention some things about the labels that we read, because we can tend to gain a little bit of comfort in some of the meats we're eating when we see labels like free range and cage free and grass fed, and that's all fine and well, but those terms, although sound better, aren't always what we believe them to be. And I want to just talk about that briefly. So cage free means that the animals weren't raised in a cage, but that doesn't mean they're like with chickens. There's not like like so many that they're literally stacked on top of each other, climbing all over each other. That's still cage free. What I just described, that can be labeled as cage free. Now, what's free range? Free range doesn't mean that they're out and roaming around and interacting with other members of their species. Free range just means that they have access to the outside. And a lot of these huge facilities that have all these chickens in them, they might have an opening for the chickens to go out, but they don't have a lot of room once they get out, and most of them probably can't even get to it or even know that it's there. And that would still be classified as free range. And last thing I'll mention is grass-fed. Okay, so we have to pay a lot more for our meat that's grass-fed, when in fact it's kind of crazy, because that's what a cow's supposed to eat anyway. But we have to pay more for that. Like, what does that tell you? Most of the meat we're eating is meat that contains food that a cow ingested that is not natural to its body. So therefore, it's rejected by its body. It's toxic to its body. It's not absorbed well. It's not handled well. It's not taken well. Cows have a stomach that are built just to eat grass. We can't eat grass. They have a cow that has like multiple chambers and different stomachs, and they have their own process to eat grass and turn it into thousands of pounds. We don't have that. The grains jack their whole system, like I mentioned. Grass-fed is great. So maybe these cows are grass-fed, but you have to beware of grass-fed and grass-fed only labels. You really want to find grass-fed and grass-finished, because a lot of times what happens, a cow will be raised on grass, and then when it goes to the slaughterhouse, in those days leading up to slaughter, it will be fed grain. And that is, maybe the cow ate grass for years and years of its life, but if the last things it ate in the days before it was slaughtered was grain, well, what's the difference? It's still going to have those grains in its system right before it was slaughtered. So, look for grass-fed and grass-finished. So, now lastly, I want to talk a little bit about eggs. People don't know what are eggs? Eggs are they meat, or are they dairy? They're obviously not dairy. We lump them in with meat because they're ultimately going to become animal meat. But if you want to just keep it as a category on its own, going back to cholesterol, and the problem with cholesterol is not something that we need in our diet. Actually, it's something to be avoided. When you see daily recommended averages or recommended daily averages, that's an amount not to be exceeded. Not an amount to get in your diet. You don't need any cholesterol. Our body makes all the cholesterol we need. Now, one egg, and all the cholesterol is in the yolk, contains almost 200 milligrams of cholesterol, which is almost a daily maximum. Excuse me. So that's an incredible amount of cholesterol. So beware of your eggs. A lot of us eat a lot of eggs, and the egg whites, I guess, are better because they don't have the cholesterol, but beware of the amount of fat and especially cholesterol in eggs. It's quite a bit. So the challenge really is to think about some of these things, and think about, as we've gone through the challenge and some of the videos that we've done leading up to the challenge, just to get us prepared as far as mindfulness. What am I putting in my body? Is this building me up, or is this tearing me down? Does this contain the nutrients and the antioxidants and the enzymes designed by nature over millions of years to be easily digested and assimilated in the human body to maintain health and growth, i.e., is it nutritious? And this mindfulness will help us at every meal to make hopefully better decisions. And when it comes to the animal fats and all the other things that I mentioned that are in them, and I'm sure I left out a ton of stuff because I could ramble on for hours about this topic alone without getting into, like I said, the ethical and the environment. Is this building me up? What is it? Is it alive or dead? Is it live food? We talk about live foods and the power of live foods to clean us, to nurture us, to give us energy and vitality, to eliminate obstructions in our body. The animal fats are doing the exact opposite. Just look at them. Look at the density, the weight, the salt, the dyes, just the amount of girth to it. It's not giving us any of the vital nutrients that we need. And if anything, it's requiring more energy in our body to tear it down, which takes energy away from healing, from releasing weight, from building up, from repairing tissue, and all of those other vital functions that our body's doing, and sleep. What is this doing? What is this really doing for us? And one of the very upcoming sessions is going to be on protein. We need to talk about protein. We need to once and for all literally smash this myth that we need to get protein from animal fats, and if we don't, we're going to have a protein problem. So why don't we do this for challenge number one? Start associating animal foods and meats and dairy with fat and cholesterol and salt as opposed to protein. Getting protein is a good thing, and we need it. It's a macronutrient essential to our survival, but we just don't need it in the form and with all of the other garbage that we're getting in the animal fats. And the more we can convince ourselves and truly believe in it, and you're always obviously welcome to do your own research and ask us any follow-up questions, more and more studies are being done that eliminating these foods from our diet is one of the quickest ways to repair your health and to reverse damage done in the body. And if you're listening to this to some degree, that is a goal of yours, and that's phenomenal. So challenge number one, it's animal fats, it's not animal protein. And lastly, are we willing to start to phase some of these foods out, look for healthier substitutions? That's where we really help our clients most. Not in telling them this information. Most of us intuitively know it. But what can I eat? Okay, if this is bad, what can I substitute it with? And that is where we get the true joy out of helping people find foods to replace the low quality foods that arguably aren't even fitting the definition of food, and seeing them light up by finding real food that's tasty, that's enjoyable, that they could eat in healthy quantities without having to watch so much, and actually feel better, lose weight and whatnot. So it is possible. We see it all the time, and we see dramatic improvements in health. And one of the biggest things is, we talked about processed foods, phasing out processed foods and phasing out animal fats, and finding and building and trial and error with a much healthier, survival biased diet and pantry of rich, healthy, organic, live food will build us up and get us back on track much quicker and to a greater extent that we even can conceive at this very moment. So that's it for today. Let's perhaps think about phasing out or cutting down on our meat and dairy if we can, if we're willing to. All right, any questions, any other stuff? I know I hit you with a lot today, and like I said, I could have went on more and more. Hit us up. Let's talk about it. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow with, day 9 already. Okay.